Christina put up a question about on the conceptual framework which Claudia presented. Okay, fine, all this knowledge is good, but what next? Like, how can we actually analyze it? So I'll be presenting a case of Oslo's shared bicycle scheme, and just present on how we can analyze the data and then comment on policies of how things are happening. And shared bikes are typically one of the most popular smart mobility scheme, and because it's linked, it's operated through your smartphone. It's not just how it's conceptual, it's in its functionality also. It's a smart mobility scheme all over the world. So how do you So before 2016, this was just an ad hoc program. It was not really established. But in 2016, the municipality of Oslo went into collaboration with a company called Urban Sharing. And before that, it was funded by Clear Channel, which is an advertising company. But then the municipality actually went in sort of partnership, and it became a part of the transport planning schematics of Oslo. However, there was not really any sort of standardized way of how to go about it. So it still continued as an ad hoc method. But after urban sharing came in, there was quite a jump in usage of the system, from 60% to 110% trips being made on the bike sharing. A total of 4.7 million, which has jumped even more by the end of 2019. But in 2019, what happened is that e-scooters came in Oslo's market. So there's a sort of competition going on right now between e-scooters and bike sharing. And I unfortunately don't have that study here, but just to highlight the patterns of what was happening in Oslo. So is this the pointer? Yeah. So this is Oslo Center. This is Oslo Center, and you can see that this is the start station and end station in the morning. So it's starting all over the city, but it's coming down to the center. So there is a center periphery game going on. In the evening, again, you see that it's starting from here and going all over the city. Again, in the weekend, it's more scattered, so that even though the center periphery thing is there, but you see that there's a clear pattern of how the Oslo shared scheme has been working. There's a clear center periphery dichotomy here. And just to mention that these are all docking station based systems, so there's no free floating. So basically the municipality and the urban sharing company is actively involved in how the pattern of usage of bike sharing emerges. So what we see is that it was restricted to employment hubs between 9 to 4. And urban sharing had it was previously called UIP, the company, it had no idea of how to actually find the right location. And there was a lack of integration with neighboring municipalities. So although there was a lot of talk on multimodality, these bicycles were closed for the Oslo municipality. You couldn't take them to the neighboring municipality, although it was a functional region. So a lot of people living in Oslo work in the neighboring municipality and vice versa. So what we see is, again, the most popular trip station. There is a geographical bias. Distance to city center was the primary deciding factor. And now UIP did a survey, and what we saw that although men were using this system much more, the women were catching up. So if you see here, just this season, the women are catching up. And my question was, is this a system inertia or needs deficit? And what we found was it was basically affected by the new docking stations coming up in areas where women were working. And because now it was being provided in areas where they were working, their usage of bike sharing had gone up. So, and the center, it's primarily men-dominated workplaces, and women are working on the periphery. So that kind of dynamics was working here. So this is what I was talking about. We plotted, we took all the trips, this is 4.7 million trips, and we plotted the usage of men and women. And what we see is on the periphery, majority of women are working on the periphery and also living on the periphery. And that's why you see that the flow lines are much thicker, or the usage is much higher on the peripheral regions, whereas the concentration of docking station is in the central region. So there was a mismatch between how the system was designed, but it was not, this mismatch was not happening due to intention of the municipality or the company. There was just no way of analyzing a pattern or a method of how to place this system. So after we presented this study, the municipality suddenly became quite aware, and now they have started putting docking stations in areas where there is a primary dominance of women employment centers, because even in Scandinavia, with all the equality between genders happening, the preference of areas of work are quite different, or sectors of work are quite different. So women are majority quite heavily employed in hubs like hospitals, and hospitals typically have been located on the outskirts of the city, not in the center. So these kind of dynamics was not taken into consideration when the system was put up. And we did a multivariate analysis, and what we saw that the women were more concentrated on the outer fringes, both as matter of residential and employment locations, and high employment and residential density of women led to higher bike sharing. So if you look at the previous usage of how it was, and the women were not using it, it was not because they were not preferring to use it or they were against it, it was just not available for them. So the moment it started becoming more available, they started using it. However, even in the current situation, their usage is different. So men are using more as access egress mode, so the first last mile, but women are using it as an independent mode. So it's for multi-purpose trips and longer trips. So when we conducted a survey, what we found was that men, right now you can hire a shared bike for 45 minutes, and men were fine with 30 minutes. They didn't see the point of having it for 45 minutes or longer. But women wanted it for 2 hours. They were not happy with the provision of 45 minutes hiring time. And that just goes on to show that the pattern of usage is different, and if you don't understand these patterns, you will create a system which will favor men more than women. And this has happened in all sorts of schemes, and this is just an example of how to understand one particular smart mobility scheme and work towards it to make it more integrated. So the emerging keywords from our current analysis of provision of Oslo bike sharing was P-car, commute, which is work-related travel, fixed employment, and fixed areas. And by fixed areas, it was primarily the central area of Oslo's. And the desired target groups were commuters, single people who want to hang out, party, and dinner crowd, and tourists. Mothers with children are still excluded because there's no baby seat provided in the or child seat provided in the shared bikes. In fact, in Brussels, I saw that they had this kurva, what is it called in English? A basket, yeah, to put your person out. But in the Oslo bikes, even today, they don't have this basket provision. And that was one element coming out of the survey, that these kind of design elements were not taken into consideration, and they affect men and women differently. What the smart mobility system should be targeting is flexible trips, trip chaining, traveling with children, linking multiple geographically spread low-end jobs. And the undesired target group should become the primary beneficiary. That's how we will actually scale up inclusivity in smart mobilities. So family with young children, and this is not women per se, it's family with young children. It can be men or women, whoever. Shift workers. So they don't have fixed employment areas, they don't have fixed employment time, but they are productive citizens of a society who need to be taken into cognizance. And women. Women, I say primarily because even with all the equality happening in Scandinavia, they are quite segregated in different kinds of jobs, different kinds of location, different kinds of preferences. So their preferences are varied. And these preferences also need to be taken into account, something what, for example, Ulf was talking about. And and the elements which are not very hard and tangible and representable in data, if you don't actually pay attention to them, you will just end up making another fiasco in transport sector, as has happened in the past 60, 70 years. So coming back to the Oslo shared bikes, we see that it's regulated as a street furniture. Because it's tied to a docking station, it's not a mode, it's a street furniture. And that's quite questionable in itself. How can a bike be a street furniture? And then your entire infrastructure planning, your imagination, your discussions differs, rather than making it a part of your multimodal chain. So bike sharing should be seen as a dynamic element of the city's mobility system. And when you talk about multimodality, mass and transition, shared bikes and now increasingly e-scooters have to be taken into cognizance and under consideration. And also you will see what, for example, Hilda will be presenting on Rollator, the electric chairs, mobility chairs, rollators, yeah. That's another smart mobility element which has not even percolated even a tiny bit into the multimodality discussion. I mean, the municipalities are grappling how to deal with e-scooters. So this electric rollators are like far in the scene, but this will happen because Europe is an aging society and entire Western world is an aging society, and this will become more and more of an issue of how to cover the first last mile access egress for elderly. I meet a lot of elderly women in Oslo who tell me, fine, we will take public transport, we won't drive, but I cannot walk to the station, it's too slippery, it's too uncomfortable. How to reach the station? And these kind of discussions is very important to keep moving and also include them in the smart discussions. So I think that was a short snapshot of how you can look at smart mobilities from a pure data-driven, analytical perspective and link it to more qualitative, subjective preferences. So I hope partly it answers of how you can move beyond the smart mobility broad discussion to very pinpointed schemes and analyze it. Thank you.